Have you ever wondered what it felt like to be sitting at a red light in 1970, the engine shaking the entire car, the smell of high-octane fuel filling the air, and beside you sat another driver with the exact same idea? When that light turned green, there were no launch control systems, no traction control, no computers deciding how much power reached the pavement. It was simply man, machine, and hundreds of angry American horses fighting for grip. The 1970s are often remembered as the decade when muscle cars began to fade. Emissions regulations tightened. Insurance companies punished high-performance models. The oil crisis changed buying habits forever. But before all of that happened, America built some of the quickest street machines the world had ever seen. Cars that could embarrass European sports cars at a quarter of the price. Cars that still make enthusiasts stop and stare more than 50 years later. Today, we're counting down the 10 fastest American muscle cars of the 1970s, ranked by their real-world performance, quarter-mile times. And legendary reputation, not just horsepower figures printed in brochures. Some of these names are expected. Others might completely surprise you. So, settle in, because this countdown begins now. Number 10. 1970 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 LT1. Before Chevrolet unleashed the monster big block Camaros, there was another machine quietly earning respect in a completely different way. Camaro Z28 wasn't the loudest, it wasn't the biggest, and it certainly wasn't the most powerful car on this list. But what it lacked in brute force, it made up for with balance, precision, and an engine that absolutely loved to rev. Under the hood sat Chevrolet's legendary 350 cubic inch LT1 V8, officially rated at 360 horsepower. Unlike many muscle cars that produce mountains of torque down low, the LT1 had a different personality. It wanted to be driven hard. Push the throttle deeper. Watch the tachometer climb. And suddenly the Camaro transformed into something that felt closer to a road racing machine than a traditional muscle car. 0 to 60 came in around 6.2 seconds, while the quarter mile disappeared in roughly 14.5 seconds. Those numbers may not sound outrageous today, but in 1970, they were enough to earn respect at almost any stoplight. The second-generation Camaro also introduced a completely new body, long, low, aggressive, with muscular fenders that looked fast even while parked. Chevrolet engineers focused heavily on suspension improvements, giving drivers more confidence through corners than many of its rivals, while others specialized in straight-line speed. The Z28 proved that handling mattered too. Today, collectors admire the LT1 because it represents one of the final moments before emissions regulations began choking performance across the industry. It was a reminder that muscle wasn't always about having the biggest engine. Sometimes, it was about making every horsepower count. Number 9. 1970 AMC Rebel Machine. Mention American muscle cars, and most people immediately think of Chevrolet, Ford, Dodge, or Plymouth. But one company refused to stay in the shadows. American Motors Corporation, better known simply as AMC. They decided to challenge Detroit's giants with something bold, something unforgettable. The Rebel Machine. And what a name that was. It sounded less like a car and more like a warning. Powered by a 390 cubic inch V8 producing 340 horsepower, the Rebel Machine delivered far more performance than most people expected. With a 0 to 60 time of around 6.1 seconds and a quarter mile in approximately 14.4 seconds, it could easily surprise drivers who underestimated the small independent automaker. The Rebel Machine wasn't built to blend in. Early models wore an eye-catching red, white, and blue paint scheme inspired by the American flag. It was impossible to ignore. Some loved it. Others thought it was outrageous. But everyone noticed it. And perhaps that's exactly what AMC wanted. Despite being produced in relatively small numbers, the Rebel Machine quickly earned a reputation as one of the best values in the muscle car world. You weren't paying for a famous badge. You were paying for performance. And it was delivered. Looking back today, the Rebel Machine feels like the underdog that never stopped fighting. It proved you didn't have to be one of Detroit's big three to build a car capable of running with the best. Sometimes, the greatest legends aren't the ones everyone expects. They're the ones brave enough to challenge the giants. We've only just begun. Because from this point on, the horsepower climbs, the engines grow even larger, and the competition becomes absolutely ruthless. The next cars weren't simply fast. They were built during the final golden years before changing regulations transformed the muscle car landscape forever. Number 8. 1970 Pontiac GTO Judge Ram Air 4. There are very few names in automotive history that carry as much weight as the Pontiac GTO. Many enthusiasts call it the car that started the muscle car revolution back in the 1960s. But by 1970, Pontiac wasn't interested in living off its reputation. It wanted to prove that the GTO still had plenty of fight left. And that's exactly what the Judge Ram Air 4 was built to do. The name alone sounded intimidating, the Judge. It wasn't asking for your approval. It was delivering the final verdict. Beneath the hood sat Pontiac's legendary 400 cubic inch Ram Air 4 V8, officially rated at 370 horsepower. On paper, that sounded impressive. But those factory ratings didn't tell the whole story. The Ram Air 4 engine breathed better than almost anything Pontiac had built before. Its high-flow cylinder heads, aggressive camshaft, and functional Ram air induction system allowed it to make far more power than many believed. Once the engine climbed into the higher RPM range, it came alive. The roar changed. The acceleration became relentless. And suddenly, the Judge reminded everyone why Pontiac had earned its performance reputation. The sprint from 0 to 60 miles per hour took around 6 seconds, while the quarter mile disappeared in roughly 14 seconds. Those numbers placed it among the quickest street cars America had to offer. But performance wasn't the only thing that made the Judge unforgettable. It had personality, bright colors, wild stripes, a towering rear spoiler, and bold, the Judge decals that left absolutely no doubt this wasn't an ordinary GTO. It was loud, confident, and just a little rebellious. Exactly what muscle cars were supposed to be. Unfortunately, timing wasn't on Pontiac's side. Insurance premiums continued climbing. Emissions regulations became stricter, and buyers slowly shifted towards smaller, more economical cars. As a result, production numbers remained relatively low. Today, surviving Ram Air 4 Judges are among the most desirable Pontiacs ever built, because they represent one final moment, when Pontiac wasn't afraid to build something outrageous, a car that looked fearless. It sounded unforgettable, and drove exactly the way a true muscle car should. Number 7. 1970 Oldsmobile 442W30. Oldsmobile wasn't usually the first brand people thought about when talking about performance. That was exactly why the 442 W30 surprised so many people. It didn't need flashy graphics. It didn't need oversized spoilers. It simply let the engine do the talking. And what an engine it was. Under the hood lived Oldsmobile's massive 455 cubic inch Rocket V8, producing 370 horsepower and an astonishing 500 pound-feet of torque. Even today, 500 pound-feet sounds impressive. Back in 1970, it was almost unbelievable. This wasn't an engine that screamed to redline. It didn't have to. The moment you pressed the accelerator, the torque arrived instantly. You could feel the entire car rise slightly as the rear tires struggled to put all that power onto the pavement. Every stoplight became an opportunity. Every empty stretch of road became a temptation. The 442 W30 reached 60 miles per hour in about 5.9 seconds and completed the quarter mile in roughly 13.9 seconds. Those figures placed it right alongside many of the era's biggest performance legends. The secret behind the W30 package wasn't just horsepower. Oldsmobile engineers equipped it with a functional cold air induction system, a performance camshaft, improved cylinder heads, and carefully tuned suspension components. The result was a car that felt brutally powerful, yet surprisingly refined. Unlike some rivals that demanded constant attention, the 442 could cruise comfortably for hours. But when the road opened up, it instantly reminded you what lived beneath that long hood. Perhaps that's why enthusiasts still admire the W30 today. It never needed to shout. It didn't chase headlines. It simply delivered performance with quiet confidence. Sometimes, the strongest person in the room isn't the loudest. The same could be said for this Oldsmobile. Number 6. 1971 Plymouth GTX 426 Hemi. By 1971, the writing was already on the wall. Emissions regulations were tightening. Insurance companies were raising premiums on high-performance cars, and buyers were beginning to think twice before ordering massive V8 engines. Most manufacturers started backing away from all-out performance, but Plymouth had one last ace up its sleeve. The GTX, equipped with the legendary 426 Hemi. If there was ever an engine that deserved the nickname the Elephant, this was it. Massive, powerful, and nearly impossible to ignore. Under the hood sat the 426 cubic inch Hemi V8, officially rated at 425 horsepower. Those numbers alone were enough to command respect. But anyone who has driven or even heard a Hemi knows that the real story begins the moment the engine fires. It doesn't simply idle. It rumbles with authority. Each pulse from the exhaust feels like a heartbeat. Each blip of the throttle promises something unforgettable. On the road, the GTX wasted no time proving its reputation. It sprinted from 0 to 60 miles per hour in around 5.8 seconds, while the quarter mile disappeared in roughly 13.9 seconds. For a full-size muscle car carrying plenty of weight, those numbers were extraordinary. The GTX wasn't flashy like some of its competitors. Its styling was cleaner, more mature, almost understated. But don't mistake that elegance for weakness. Beneath its refined appearance lived one of the fiercest engines Detroit had ever produced. And because Hemi-powered GTXs were built in extremely limited numbers during 1971, They've become some of the most desirable Mopars in existence. Today, collectors don't just see another classic Plymouth. They see the end of an era. One of the last opportunities to buy a factory-built Hemi before regulations changed the muscle car landscape forever. Owning one isn't simply about horsepower. It's about preserving a piece of American history. Number 5, 1970 Ford Torino Cobra 429 Super Cobra Jet. Ford had something to prove. Chevrolet had the Chevelle. Dodge had the Challenger. Plymouth had the Cuda. And Ford answered with a machine that looked every bit as aggressive as its rivals. The Torino Cobra. But this wasn't just another stylish coupe. This was Ford's heavyweight contender. At its heart was the fearsome 429 Super Cobra Jet V8, officially producing 375 horsepower. Once again, factory ratings didn't tell the entire story. Many enthusiasts believe the real output was significantly higher. The Super Cobra Jet package wasn't just about adding a larger engine. Ford strengthened nearly every major component. Heavy-duty connecting rods, forged internal parts, improved cooling, and the famous drag pack, which paired the engine with a performance rear axle built for brutal acceleration. The result? A car that exploded off the starting line. The Torino Cobra could reach 60 miles per hour in about 5.7 seconds and complete the quarter mile in roughly 13.8 seconds. Those were numbers capable of challenging nearly everything Detroit had to offer. What made the Torino unique was its personality. It didn't rely on exaggerated scoops or dramatic stripes. Instead, it carried itself with quiet confidence, long lines, a muscular stance, and just enough attitude to let everyone know it meant business. Behind the wheel, the 429 Super Cobra Jet delivered a driving experience that felt raw and mechanical. Every gear change demanded effort. Every stab of the throttle unleashed a wave of torque, and every acceleration run reminded you that this wasn't simply transportation. It was controlled violence. Yet, despite its incredible capabilities, the Torino Cobra has often lived in the shadow of more famous muscle cars, maybe because Ford's Mustang stole much of the spotlight. Maybe because the Mopar Hemi cars became cultural icons. But ask longtime enthusiasts, and they'll tell you the truth. The Torino Cobra deserves far more recognition than it usually receives. It was one of Ford's finest muscle cars, a machine built not for attention, but for victory. We've reached the point where every car remaining in this countdown is a genuine heavyweight. The next entries feature bigger engines, even quicker acceleration, and names that have become legends among muscle car fans around the world. We've arrived at the final stretch. Only 4 cars remain. By now, every machine on this list has earned its place in muscle car history. But these next 2, they weren't just respected, they became legends. One represented the raw, untamed power of Chrysler's greatest engine. The other proved that massive torque could humble cars with far more advertised horsepower. Let's keep counting down. Number 4, 1970 Dodge Challenger RT, 426 Hemi. Some cars make an impression the moment you see them. The 1970 Dodge Challenger RT does exactly that. Long hood, wide stance, aggressive grille, It looked like it was moving even when it was standing still. Introduced for the 1970 model year, the Challenger was Chrysler's bold answer to the growing pony car market. But when buyers checked the option box for the 426 Hemi, this stylish coupe transformed into something far more serious. Under the hood sat one of the most legendary engines America has ever produced. The 426 cubic inch Hemi V8, officially rated at 425 horsepower. But those who lived through the era will tell you that number barely scratched the surface. The Hemi wasn't just powerful, it was explosive. The engine's hemispherical combustion chambers allowed it to breathe incredibly well, producing relentless power throughout the rev range. The moment the throttle opened, the Challenger lunged forward with a force that pinned drivers into their seats. A run from 0 to 60 miles per hour took around 5.6 seconds, while the quarter mile vanished in approximately 13.7 seconds. Those were astonishing numbers for a street car in 1970. But driving a Hemi Challenger wasn't just about speed. It demanded respect. There were no electronic safety systems to save you. No traction control, no stability management. Just a massive V8, rear-wheel drive. And your right foot, on a warm summer day, the rear tires could disappear into clouds of smoke with the slightest provocation. That unpredictability became part of its personality. It wasn't trying to be civilized. It was built for drivers who wanted the full experience. Unfortunately, very few people ordered the expensive Hemi option. Insurance costs were soaring. Fuel prices were becoming a concern. And many buyers simply couldn't justify the extra expense. That makes surviving Hemi Challengers incredibly rare today. Walk through any major collector car auction, and when a genuine 1970 Hemi Challenger crosses the stage, the room goes quiet. Everyone knows they're witnessing one of the greatest American muscle cars ever built. It's more than steel and chrome. It's a symbol of a time when Detroit chased horsepower without apology. Number 3, 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1. Here's where this countdown takes an unexpected turn. When people think of muscle cars, they usually picture Chevrolet, Ford, Dodge, or Plymouth. Buick rarely enters the conversation. And that's exactly why the 1970 Buick GSX Stage 1 shocked the automotive world. It didn't arrive with the loudest advertising. It didn't carry the famous Hemi badge. It simply showed up and outran many of its competitors. At the heart of the GSX Stage 1 was Buick's enormous 455 cubic inch V8. Officially, it produced 360 horsepower. At first glance, that doesn't sound particularly impressive compared to some of the other cars on this list. But horsepower wasn't Buick's secret weapon. Torque was. An incredible 510 pound-feet of torque made the GSX one of the strongest accelerating muscle cars of its era. The moment you touched the accelerator, the car surged forward with effortless force. It didn't need sky-high RPM. It didn't need dramatic engine noise. It simply unleashed wave after wave of pulling power. The result was stunning. The GSX Stage 1 reached 60 miles per hour in around 5.5 seconds and completed the quarter mile in approximately 13.4 seconds. In magazine tests, it often matched or even beat cars with significantly higher advertised horsepower. That surprised everyone, even seasoned journalists. The GSX looked the part, too. Its bold hood scoop, front and rear spoilers, racing stripes, and eye-catching colors made it impossible to mistake for an ordinary Buick, especially in its famous satin yellow finish. Yet, beneath all that style was a car that felt surprisingly refined. It offered comfort, a smooth ride, and a quiet confidence that set it apart from some of its rowdier rivals. Until you bury the throttle. Then, everything changed. The rear tires fought for grip. The front end lifted. And the big 455 delivered one relentless shove after another. The GSX proved a lesson that's still true today. Horsepower numbers don't always tell the whole story. Real performance happens where rubber meets the road. Because Buick built so few GSX Stage 1 models, they're now among the most valuable and sought-after American muscle cars ever produced. Collectors don't chase them because they're flashy. They chase them because they represent one of the greatest engineering achievements of the muscle car era, a true sleeper. That became a legend. We've reached the final two. If you've made it this far, you already know these aren't just fast cars. They're rolling pieces of American history. Machines that pushed engineering to its limits before emissions regulations, rising insurance costs, and the fuel crisis changed the automotive world forever. Even today, more than half a century later, these two names still command respect at car shows, auctions, and drag strips around the world. Let's reveal the final rankings. Number 2, 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. If there was ever a muscle car built to intimidate, it was the 1970 Chevrolet Chevelle SS 454 LS6. This wasn't a car that whispered its intentions. It announced them the moment the engine fired. The deep rumble from its exhaust wasn't just noise. It was a warning. Under that long hood lived Chevrolet's legendary 454 cubic inch LS 6 big block V8, officially rated at an astonishing 450 horsepower. To this day, it remains one of the highest factory horsepower ratings ever given to a classic American muscle car. But just like many engines of that era, enthusiasts have long believed the real output was even higher. Chevrolet engineers knew exactly what they had created. A high-compression monster equipped with a massive Holley 4-barrel carburetor, solid lifters, and a performance camshaft that loved to breathe at higher RPM. The result was breathtaking. The LS6 could launch from 0 to 60 miles per hour in about 5.4 seconds. The quarter-mile disappeared in as little as 13.4 seconds, making it one of the quickest production cars money could buy in 1970. And yet, numbers only tell part of the story. Imagine sitting behind the wheel. Your hands grip the steering wheel tightly. The hood stretches endlessly in front of you. You press the accelerator. The rear tires fight for traction. The nose rises toward the sky. And for a few unforgettable seconds, nothing else matters. This wasn't simply transportation. It was controlled chaos. The Chevelle SS combined brutal straight-line performance with unmistakable styling. The blacked-out grille, the power bulge hood, the bold SS badges. Every detail told the world this wasn't an ordinary Chevrolet. It was built to dominate. Even today, the LS6 has become one of the most collectible muscle cars ever produced. At major collector auctions, pristine examples regularly sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not because they're rare alone, but because they represent the absolute peak of Chevrolet's muscle car era. Many enthusiasts still argue that the LS6 deserves the number 1 spot. And honestly, it's a debate that will probably never end. because standing above it is one car that has become almost mythical. Number 1, 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. When people imagine the golden age of American muscle, this is often the first car that comes to mind. The 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda. It wasn't simply fast. It wasn't simply powerful. It became a legend. Everything about the Hemi Cuda demanded attention. Its wide stance, its aggressive grille, the unmistakable shaker hood scoop vibrating with every pulse of the engine. Even standing still, it looked ready to attack. And then there was the engine. The legendary 426 cubic inch Hemi V8, officially rated at 425 horsepower on paper. It actually made less horsepower than the Chevrolet SS. But the Hemi wasn't about paper. It was about reputation. Built with hemispherical combustion chambers and race-inspired engineering, this engine delivered explosive acceleration and incredible durability. The moment the light turned green, the Hemi Cuda came alive. It stormed from 0 to 60 miles per hour in approximately 5.3 seconds and covered the quarter mile in around 13.5 seconds. While capable of reaching a top speed close to 140 miles per hour for 1970. That was extraordinary. But perhaps the Hemi Cuda's greatest achievement wasn't its speed. It was the emotion it created. Every drive felt like an event. The roar of the exhaust echoed through neighborhoods. People turned their heads long before the car came into view. Children pressed their faces against windows. Adults stopped conversations just to watch it pass. Few cars have ever captured imagination the way the Hemi Cuda did, ironically. Its greatest enemy wasn't another muscle car. It was timing. Insurance premiums exploded. Emissions regulations tightened. The fuel crisis was just around the corner. Very few buyers ordered the expensive Hemi option at the time. No one imagined these cars would one day become priceless pieces of automotive history. Today, original Hemi Cudas are among the most valuable American muscle cars ever built. Some have sold for well over $1 million, proving that legends never lose their value. Because what collectors are buying isn't just horsepower. They're buying a moment in history. When Detroit built cars with almost no compromises and no fear. That's why, more than 50 years later, the 1970 Plymouth Hemi Cuda remains the undisputed king of 1970s American muscle cars. The 1970s marked both the peaks and the beginning of the end for the original muscle car era. Within just a few years, stricter emission standards, lower compression ratios, rising fuel prices, and skyrocketing insurance costs transformed the industry forever. The horsepower wars came to an end. Many legendary nameplates disappeared, and the era of giant big block V8 slowly faded into history. But their legacy never did. These cars became more than machines. They became symbols of freedom, of bold engineering, of a time when automakers weren't afraid to chase one goal above everything else: pure performance. Whether your favorite is the thunderous Chevelle SS, the unstoppable Buick GSX, the iconic Hemi Cuda, or one of the other legends on this list, every one of them helped define an unforgettable chapter in American automotive history. And even today, the sound of a classic V8 still has the power to stop people in their tracks. Some legends don't grow old. They simply become timeless. If you enjoyed this countdown, let us know which 1970s muscle car deserves the crown in your opinion. Is it the mighty Hemi Cuda, the brutal Chevelle LS6, or another classic that you think should have made the list? If you love classic American muscle cars, rare classics, vintage trucks, and automotive history, make sure to like this video, subscribe to Vintage Ignition, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next journey through the greatest cars ever built. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, keep the legends alive, keep the engines roaring, and we'll see you in the next video.